to our workshop, you usually see us handing out a questionnaire and asking you your experience, your thoughts, and your feedback, because those data help us as the Alexander Foundation to improve our interventions. So please, stick around, hear the story and the risk factors by our expert later on. And our deputy will also tell you the plan that we have in place for 2018. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Can I get another round of applause for Ms. Woodley? So some very sobering statistics, but I think that, as Dr. Lam said at the end, it's better to know what is out there. Without the work of the National Drug Council and getting some of these statistics together, we wouldn't have the data that we need to be able to make the decisions to make the intervention. And of course, I'm going to put a shameless plug in for the National Drug Council because they are one of the agencies under our ministry. I can tell you that they're a small team that works incredibly hard and they're incredibly passionate about the work that they do. So I just ask you to give the National Drug Council a round. So just a reminder, there's no official coffee break, so please do find your way to the back of the room if you need to get a little more caffeinated. If you have parked across the street at Andy's Auto, you need to go move your car. I understand that they don't take kindly to people parking on their lot, unless you're going to have a rental car. So I would encourage you, if you have parked across the road, please go make sure that you move your car before they move it for you. All right. So again, that was a great opening to set the stage, to give us an idea of what the landscape is in terms of our children and youth mental health. And our next chapter is Understanding the Intersection between Delinquency and Mental Illness. And the speaker for that chapter is Kevin Ashworth, who is a police inspector with the RCIPS Family Support Unit. Inspector Kevin Ashworth joined the Greater Manchester Police in the United Kingdom in 1993 and has since worked in a variety of policing roles throughout his 25-year career. Diverse experiences include first response and police patrol, community policing, Proactive Drugs and Crime Unit, and national and regional recruit training, as well as his latest posting here with the RCIPS in the Family Support Unit. Inspector Ashworth's current work focuses on the safeguarding and investigation of child abuse and neglect cases as part of the Multi-Agency Safeguarding Hub, or MASH, as well as managerial oversight of the RCIPS Domestic Violence Unit. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the stage Inspector Kevin Ashworth, who is going to speak about Chapter 2, Understanding the Intersection between Delinquency and Mental Illness.
Good morning, everyone. Protocol established, I'd like to just get on with the presentation. It's very overwhelming to be here today, and it was an absolute pleasure to be invited by Dr. Lam, or is it Dr. Green now, I'm not sure. But congratulations again on your recent marriage. Just to add extra pressure, my own daughter's just arrived as well, so I'll get some feedback from her. So I'll just wait for the presentation to load up behind me. And I've been warned by the organisers that we're already over time, so I have a little timer here going on. As we present, I'm not sure, Dr. Lam, you mentioned that Facebook was now out of fashion. I'm not sure if His Excellency was aware of that. Maybe he's gone to update his Facebook profile to another social media. But I certainly saw him taking photographs, and it's amazing that we get such high level executive support for the Foundation, for mental health, mental wellness in general. So, as we start the presentation, so also reassuring that when your name's announced as a speaker, everyone stands up and goes and gets coffee at the back. So I'm not sure if people have heard me speak before or whether that's that. Thank you. Okay. So I'd like to present on behalf of the Royal Cayman Islands Police and in collaboration with the Department of Children and Family Services as well. As part of our MASH project that we have ongoing for 2 years, which I will explain in a little bit more detail as the presentation is ongoing. And I'd like to thank Dr Lam for just presenting all that data, which I was frantically trying to interpret, because this was the first time that that data has been officially announced. And it was a test of my own research and my own knowledge in the profession, really, as to whether that data is similar to the data that the police have. And it's interesting to move forward now with the foundation to compare that data and collaborate as to how we can then use that data to then drive our policies and strategies and make sure that we are actually addressing the key problems in the community and with the youth. So without further ado, I'll just continue with the introduction. And where I've got the slide that says me, that was Kevin in 2018 with a beard. That was so 2018, so I've moved on now, been a bit more trendy. Mainly because my wife told me to shave it off, so. But as introduced, I won't go over my background. It was introduced by Miss Jennifer, thank you for that. I'm into my 26th year of policing now. Policing has stunted my growth, and hence I've stayed at 5'6", so I'm just glad that the podium isn't higher than it is. And that's, in that 26 years of policing, I have seen a range of jobs in the police, and that was the beauty of joining the police, that it does give you that variety. But I can say with hand on heart that throughout that 26 years, mental health has been a regular component in everything that we've done in the police, and certainly in the jobs that I've engaged in the police, whether it's teaching, whether it's response, or whether it's dealing, as I do now, with the youth that we deal with in the MASH unit. That mental health is a factor throughout, and of course our understanding of that then lends us to want to help the youth more and make sure that we are correctly policing the society. So, my job currently is in the MASH unit, but as I say, we have I've had a variety of policing experiences, and perhaps one of the, aside from the current job I'm doing, the most challenging was in community policing. And again, within that community policing sphere, I came across all manner of people, but youth in particular, and helping with football clubs, for instance, with schools and weekend working, helping the youth in an inner city area of Manchester in the UK. And I'm a red, by the way, in case anybody's wondering, because I know Andre Ebanks is in the room, I think, and he's a Manchester City supporter, so there's immediate conflict there. But helping those youth made me realise, the family histories were challenging, and it was no surprise that the youth that we were encountering, mainly from a criminal perspective, and we were trying to divert them from criminal activity, emanated from their family life. And again, the statistic that I'll try and link back to all those statistics that were presented, it's no surprise that the highest percent was the problems were based in the home. As we move on to the MASH, those who are aware, the MASH unit has been set up now for almost 2 years, March 2017, so we're almost about 2-year anniversary, and I know some of my colleagues in the room, and later on the panel we have Belinda Mendoza-Williams who can maybe give some background of the MASH and explain it a little bit further. But within that MASH unit, we are a multi-agency safeguarding hub, and the word hub is the important aspect of that we are the central repository of all the referrals that are received in relation to child abuse, all manner of child abuse. And we're trying to join forces with as many partners, certainly community partners and professional partners, to make sure that we are addressing the problem of child abuse, and added to that, making sure that there's some long-term solutions and long-term assistance given to the youth of Cayman. And I guess that's enough about this. Let's move on. That was a reminder to me just to keep going on with this. And you'll have to excuse me, my 50th year now, I have to use my easy readers. So, the elephant in the room is, of course, mental health. I've used this depiction of an elephant a number of times in some presentations, and I think it's the most obvious and most graphic thing, really, that we all know about it. We all effectively suffer from it to greater or lesser extent. We all have distress in our lives, and that is a definition of a mental challenge. But this particular elephant is named taboo, and of course, in policing, in Cayman, that the subject of mental health and mental wellness has been a taboo subject. Hence, when I got the request to, or the invitation, actually it wasn't an invitation, I was told to do the presentation by Dr. Lam. She can be very influential sometimes. That I took up straight away the offer because I wanted to, A, demonstrate that the RCIPS are serious about mental health and making sure that we give the community some information in relation to how policing is done in Cayman Islands, and the last few slides of the presentation talk about the police response and what we are actually doing to try and address the problem in partnership with the agencies that we deal with. So, welcome to Taboo. One thing to mention, first of all, I just alluded to it then, is that the police service, police officers, are not immune from mental wellness, mental health challenges, mental health problems. I've been in the police 26 years. I semi-joked about it stunting my growth. I've been 5'6" virtually all my life, so that's not a problem. But there's been recognised studies now around the world that recognise that all emergency services and many professions do suffer from some level of mental health challenge. And of course, pointing to my occupation, is the understanding that if we recognise and understand it in ourselves, then of course we can be more empathetic in our dealings with not just young people, of course, but with adults as well. I know today is very much centred around the youth of Cayman, and quite rightly so, but it's important to mention that as adults, of which many of us in the room, that we also suffer, and I think that's the appropriate phrase to use, some element of distress. I defy anybody in the room to put their hand up and say that they've never had a stressful moment or a situation that they've encountered that they've not been comfortable with. And although we might not recognise that as stress, then doing studies and research on the subject, there's no stigma attached to it. Dr. Lockhart, I think, mentioned last year, having been in the audience, about stigma, and went on further to explain that, about how we should embrace that and look at mental health in the same way as physical health, and make sure that we look after our bodies as well as our minds, and without any prompting. I think that's what His Excellency mentioned before as well. I'm very envious that he gets time. I don't know how he finds time to do some physical exercise, but it's obviously something that we should all aspire to as well. So, I don't know if you're aware or saw Instagram, the egg on Instagram. Did anybody? We've got a show of hands in the room. You're probably all thinking, what's going on now? Okay, good, because I'm not the only one. But following on a media campaign, a PR campaign, this egg appeared in multimedia, social media. I'm not an Instagram follower, but of course it got into mainstream news. And if you follow the story, currently I think a single egg created 25.5 million likes on Instagram. That didn't make news itself, apart from the fact that that beat Kylie Jenner, whoever she is. That surpassed Kylie Jenner's likes on Instagram, and that was the poignant moment that everyone started looking at the egg and wondering what it was all about. Dr. Lockhart's thinking at me, Kevin's lost the plot here, what's going on? There's a purpose to this, don't worry. So an egg can receive 25.5 million likes. Maybe it's just to get the Jenners off Facebook or Instagram, I don't know. But what was really poignant about that is that the egg was a symbol of fragility. And the PR company, amazing in keeping it under wraps for so long really, then looked at that egg and started posting further pictures of the egg in some form of distress. And then one of the final pictures they posted was about the egg obviously broken and about talk to somebody, talk to someone. And of course, it was for a mental health campaign, and then they've gone on to promote further. So those that put their hands up, was that what you were thinking as well? Hopefully that's the case, yeah. So I'm not talking off script here. And things like that, and it's not to encourage telemarketers to use an egg as their campaign or anything like that, but it does symbolise sort of fragility, and that's what mental health and mental illness is all about really, isn't it? Fragility, and making sure that we do talk to someone and can go for help when we need it. So, I'm not going to bombard you with statistics. I haven't got a script in front of me. The presentation was designed really as a discussion topic, which is really difficult having a one-way discussion topic. So I'm hoping that you will interact in some way just with your body language and facial expressions. But I'd like to put a Cayman perspective on some of the statistics that the police produce and that I'm aware of working in the police and having access to the database we have. One of the first ones is that 109 children under the age of 18, as according to the children law, were actually arrested in 2018. And this was a test of my research because Dr Lam just presented then that the children themselves, the youth themselves in the survey, if you remember, they said that it was 5%. My data actually indicates 4%. So we'll give that a little data anomaly, but our statistics from our arrest database shows that 4% of all the arrests that we have, approximately 2,500, 2,600 arrests last year, 4% were of children. Significantly males with a much higher population, 78%, and of course females 22%, just to make up that group. Now, in number terms, that's, if you look at the population density, the figures of the Cayman population, that's significant, and you have to then compare that to other jurisdictions. In the UK, for instance, the arrest rate of children is actually 9%, so it's a lot higher, and therefore we're beating the UK, so that's going to be a good thing, yeah. And I'll look at, I'll explain what I think are the factors in relation to children being arrested and how we can even reduce that figure even further. So looking at arrests of children 2018 from 2014, and this was an interesting study for me because we've not done it before. And again, the National Drugs Council survey has prompted me to look at our own analysis, our own data. Of course, we need resources and software to be able to do that. But bringing together the data that's produced here, that's been presented today, there will be further collaborations on that and how we can do joint presentations in the future to show that these different levels of data are conjoined and we can present them really as a multi-agency approach to that. So in 2014, 7.4% children arrested. 2015, 6.5%. 16, 6%, and I think you can see the trend here. Anyone who did maths at school, you can see the percentage going down. 2017, 5.7%. And then finally, the 2018 figure of 4%. What that tells me, and the way I've interpreted that, and just to clarify that under the criminal justice system, a child under the age of 10 is not deemed to be criminally responsible. So although children of that age are involved in incidents, I can't say committing crimes because under the law they're not capable of committing a crime due to their age of criminal responsibility. But they are involved in some incidents that I will discuss shortly. But the percentage of arrests is significant. I'm going to look at the offences in the next slide or so. What that does tell us, though, or tells me, and I know this from my personal interaction, through the police and professional responsibilities there, that we are looking at a downward trend. And I won't say there's been a deliberate plan or training or awareness that's taken place. That would be misleading, but there has been awareness within the police about looking at children's issues and dealing with children as offenders back in the day when the percentage was higher, but actually treated children now as victims themselves. Of course, some children up to the ages of 18, 17 are committing offences of their own free will. They know what they're doing and it's intentional. But when we're looking at younger children who are perhaps committing offences because that's normalised behaviour for them, or they're mirroring behaviour that they're seeing in schools or seeing in the home or seeing in the community or in general media, then we can start to understand why children do commit offences. And of course, my job, our job as professionals, is to try and reduce that figure even further. And I would love to either be invited back next year or present next year the statistic that 4% is down to 3.5%, for instance, that we do some collaborative approaches to reducing the number of arrests. We do have the discretion in the police to not make an arrest. It's covered under the police law. And that is the mentality of the police officers these days, driven by the multi-agency approach and by the safeguarding approach, is looking at alternative methods of how we can divert children away from the criminal justice system. That is a bedrock principle. It's something I'm going to repeat shortly, but having that system in place where we can divert them, provide them with services and accessibility to other professionals that can divert them away from them, and of course give them alternative methods of coping with their own stress, of course, their own mental wellness, and also teaching them about committing criminal activity. So the offence types, just to show those 109, the analysis just shows that actually drugs was the highest, almost a quarter, 26, or over a quarter, sorry, 26%. And again, that links in with some of the coping strategies that Dr. Lam alluded to. If we're looking at drugs as escapism, as a coping mechanism, and of course we're looking at things like gateway drugs, ganja for instance. I'm not going to go into split it down, the type of drugs and things like that, but predominantly ganja, predominantly possession of ganja and consumption of ganja. And again, we looked at binge drinking, for instance, but there's also elements of drug use as well. If we pick a child up that is clearly drunk under the influence of alcohol, that wouldn't be deemed as an offence. We look at that as a person in distress, as a youth in distress. That's much different if we pick a child up, 14, 15-year-old, that clearly smells of ganja, which is very, we can spot that, although children think, just by holding it in the breath, they can't smell it. So maybe that's a spoiler alert, I shouldn't have said that for children, but obviously we can investigate these things, and consumption of ganja particularly when we do a urine sample, we've got the forensic evidence there to be able to prove that. But that kickstarts a question in my mind is, if a child is taking drugs, what is the reason for that? And I always try to link this back when I do police training. If we're looking at anybody, any criminal activity, and a criminologist will tell you that a person committing an offence, a theft from the vehicle, a burglary, a robbery, look at what the catalyst for that was. Go back a few steps in the cause and effect timeline and look at what's made that person commit that crime. So overwhelmingly, drugs is the highest one, theft and burglary, what we term acquisitive crime, where you steal something, where you appropriate something of the rightful owner, and of course burglary and theft are closely connected. And what we are seeing, of course, is children committing offences on other children as well, of stealing cell phones, for instance, or stealing items of value maybe that they can sell on or just get some quick money for. So those acquisitive crimes are a problem. Those percentages are quite high, and those four areas are really the key areas that we're looking at. There is also a destructive element to it as well, that there's criminal damage of 5.5%. And when you look at the fact that there's only 109 arrests been made, the actual numbers are low, but the percentages speak for themselves. That there is an element of destruction, and again, it could be we've had children, committing offences against their own parents, for instance, and committing criminal damage against their own property, the parents' property, for instance, and ultimately arrests have been made. What is significant here really is to point out that just because an arrest has been made, does not mean that that child will get convicted. The ruling that comes back from the DPP's office doesn't ordinarily result in a criminal ruling or a youth justice court, for instance. So there are different interventions along the way, aside from conviction. Usually if a child has reached youth court and they get convicted, it's because all other methods of intervention have either failed or the child is not engaged with that process. Just to highlight in a different blue colour that it is significant to mention also that children have been involved in firearms offences, robberies, indecent assaults and weapons. And it'd be wrong of me not to mention that really, and not to sugarcoat the problem really, that we are having children involved in these offences. Again, with a reduced number from the volume crime of drugs, but even one child connected to or committing a robbery, connected to or committing firearms offences is one too many. And of course you have to look at why that child is doing that and what motivation they've had and what background they've had to make them think that that is an appropriate method of dealing with conflict resolution, for instance. In all the offence types, there is elements of risk-taking behaviour, of children pushing boundaries, and of course they're testing their own boundaries in a number of areas. One of the things that isn't mentioned here is the discretion that we use and the incidents that children are involved in, quite often online activity as well, sharing indecent images with each other, sexual imagery or sexting, as it's called, misuse of information communication technologies, ICT. Children are involved in these things, but we are looking at different strategies of dealing with them. And just this week in collaboration with one of the schools as to how we can educate parents, staff and students in relation to the sharing of sexual imagery. And if there's any parents in the room, you may already be aware that this is the thing that, you know, the modern meeting behind the bike sheds or whatever the parlance was in my era, in the 1800s, is different now. And of course social media and sharing of images is so easy for children, you know. Having to do it on a Polaroid camera and wait for 10 minutes for the slide doesn't really have the same impact as immediately shown. And unfortunately our children are involved in such activity and sharing indecent images, and that's what they are, of a sexual nature with each other, boys with girls, girls with boys. The data I don't have the data to present to you, but I can absolutely guarantee through my knowledge of the workings in the multi-agency safeguarding code that such reports and referrals are being made to us. And of course the schools that are hyper-vigilant to this sort of thing are really on board with that and making the referrals as soon as they possibly can, or as soon as they become aware of such activity. And we do accept that risk-taking is actually developmental imperative. You know, children have to learn to take risks, otherwise we'd never cross the road, we'd never go out of the house. I gave a presentation once on risk-taking and threat management and using a meteorite as an example, for instance. And to all of us as adults, if we looked at the statistics on meteorite hits on the Earth, there's thousands of them, in which case, why do we go outside if there's a threat of us being hit on the head by a meteorite? But of course that threat and that risk is minimal, albeit if you speak to Igor Olanov that got hit on the head a few years ago and survived to live to tell the tale, he would say different. But and it's the being struck by lightning syndrome, isn't it? You don't expect it to happen, but of course it does happen to some people. And as children engage in that risk-taking activity, which is perfectly normal, it's perfectly acceptable. We all do it as adults every day, but it's part of their self-actualization. They have to go through that risk. They have to learn to get their fingers burned before they take on proper risk-taking strategies. Other incidents, and these are offences, but other incidents that children are involved in, of course, you'll see in the media things like missing from homes, people in distress, we have child cruelty, neglect issues, but the missing from homes particularly, again, we don't categorise them as offences. They are things that children, it's such a cry for help. We see that as a cry for help from a child, that they're going missing for a reason and they need help as a result of that. And again, with the agency partners we have, we're trying to look at how we can address It's not quite an epidemic, but again, one child going missing 13, 14 years of age or younger sometimes, and going missing for a few days, as has been widely circulated in social media, does cause us some concern, a lot of concern in fact, to make sure that we get the right help for that child when they return. As we move on to child safeguarding, which is really the modern vernacular of how we look at child protection, but child safeguarding in general. And I'm really pleased to be able to partner with the DCFS, with the Health Services Authority, making sure that those conjoined agencies are able to assist in that truly multi-agency effort, as well as many, many others. And I see lots of people in the room, colleagues and co-workers that have become friends now as well because of the work that we're doing. But just to clarify that the police involvement in child safeguarding is quite often around prosecutions, because that's our law enforcement arm. The problem with that, and I'm open to admit, the problem with that is that leads a child into the criminal justice system. And of course what that might end up doing is leading that child into incarceration and ultimately into recidivism, into repeat offending. We see it in the youth courts. I've been speaking to youth workers who've dealt with these issues over a number of years, decades in fact, and they've been seeing the same names that they've seen coming through schools as young children, then as adolescents, and into high schools, and of course then into adult courts. And it's no surprise that those children that were recognised at an early age as being problematic, I think the phrase was, but also in need of some safeguarding. And because it wasn't done adequately, perhaps back in the day, that they're in this unfortunately vicious cycle of recidivism as well. And we do see many, many adults, not just young adults, older adults as well, where really their problems have never been addressed. To address that, what we're looking at is the child safeguarding referral mechanism that we have. And again, to remind you that all safeguarding referrals now, there's lots of mandated reporters in the room that work in youth serving organisations, and we keep repeating the same mantra. All safeguarding referrals, suspicions of abuse, come into the MASH at gov.ky. If you have any concerns or any advice that's needed, please just ask. What that means, under the multi-agency safeguarding banner, is that a child, parents, and indeed other professionals can have access to services. They can have additional education and awareness. They can get the correct treatment that's bespoke to their needs and their wishes. And also that there's my ideal is that eventually that will evolve into a prevention side of work as well. We are currently, and we'll produce some statistics very shortly in relation to the number of referrals, that the spike is still going up, but I'm hoping that will plateau at some point, that we can then see the prevention work that many, many of us are engaged in our own professions and worlds, but we need to join up those prevention methods to make sure that the children are protected and stop the problem happening over the horizon. It's not about what's happening tomorrow or next month or next year even. It's looking at the future years and the future generations to make sure that the preventative efforts that we do now have some benefit in the future. So all those activities are available through the multi-agency safeguarding code. Additional to that, the presentation, just a data snapshot. I'm not going to look at too many percentages on this, but of the referrals that are coming into the MASH unit, we have